So here we are again. Welcome to the Radiology edition of IHE's Inside IHE webinar series 2018. Today we're going to review some of our most recent work to advance radiology-related IT. Kevin O'Donnell will discuss encounter-based imaging workflow. It's a profile designed to support the use of non-standard imaging and integration of it into the medical record. Kinson will review the web-based image access profile. It's a profile that defines methods for image sharing and interactive viewing of imaging studies using RESTful services. And for those that are a little bit unfamiliar, today's DICOM-based solutions work really well for what they're designed to do. Transfer images from one system to another, but they don't work so well for on-demand access and interactive viewing. So WIA leverages familiar web-based technologies such as JavaScript and JSON, HTTP to access these images, and Kinson will describe the profile capabilities in greater detail. And then Kinson's also going to provide an update on some significant changes to XDS. So with that, welcome. Sit back and enjoy, and I'm now going to turn this over to Kevin O'Donnell to speak about encounter-based imaging.
So thanks, Mike. As Mike described, the first presentation here will be on our first new profile for this cycle, this season, which is the encounter-based imaging workflow. I worked on the profile in the radiology domain, and my day job is working with Canon, which people will know as the new name of the Toshiba medical systems. So to kind of give some context to this encounter-based imaging, you can think of all of the talk people have been doing lately on enterprise imaging, which is really recognition that there are a lot of uses of medical imaging throughout the enterprise. And we're all pretty familiar with the biggest chunk of that, which we sometimes call order-based imaging. And this is what you typically see in radiology and cardiology departments. This is your normal CTs and MRs and PETs and things. Typically, there is an order placed by a referring physician. The scan is scheduled in advance. It's performed off work lists. There is a formal interpretation and reading process by a radiologist at the end that results in a report which closes out the order. And that workflow has been pretty well integrated and pretty well automated over the years. In fact, the very first profile that IHE did was a scheduled workflow to address that space. Now we're starting to look at another chunk, and there were a number of people presenting on this over the past 2 or 3 or 4 years, particularly at SIM, for example, referring to what we're starting to call encounter-based imaging. And so this means imaging that's captured in the context of an encounter between a patient and a care provider, but there isn't necessarily an order. In fact, frequently there isn't. This is more ad hoc imaging. And so you can think of this as being things that are captured with point-of-care ultrasound systems, with digital cameras, iPhones, tablets, and this is really, in a lot of ways, the long tail of imaging. This is stuff happening in the dermatology department, in wound care, burn units, ERs, et cetera, et cetera. You'll notice there are a lot more et ceteras in the left circle than in the right circle. It really is something that's being done throughout. And while the order-based imaging data sets are pretty well managed, that's much less the case with the encounter-based imaging. Stuff gets dumped into media folders, and it's really difficult to get a handle on it and to make use of it in care for the patient, to make it an active part of the patient record. So what's the problem, and what's the key to solving the problem? I don't know how many of you would even remember that movie, but anyway, since it's the 1918s instead of the late 1960s, the key here is metadata. That I've got a JPEG, I've got a picture, that's great, it looks like it's a patch of skin. Who's the patient? you know, when was this taken? Why was this taken? What body part am I looking at? Who was the doctor that this is for? What department is associated with? So unless you've got the metadata to go with that JPEG, you haven't got a medical document, you've got a set of pixels. And so this profile is really focused around marshaling that metadata, communicating, and getting it tied together with the images. So if you want to be able to manage those images, if you want to be able to find them and use them again, and if you're not going to find and use them again, what was the point in taking them in the first place and storing them? So we've grouped the metadata into 4 categories. There's the patient metadata, which is all the typical identifiers and demographics that you'd expect, you know, name, date of birth, age, etc. This is how it gets woven into the medical record. There's the encounter metadata that this imaging was associated with. So what department was this taken in? What specialty? Who was the physician? What was the admission ID or admission date? Some of these other proxy identifiers. What is the reason for admission? Again, useful for trolling through large collections of images. Then we get to the procedure metadata. So what type of image is this? You know, is this an infrared image? Is this a regular image? Is this you know, ultrasound image? What's the body part? You know, so often, okay, well, it seems to be a hand. Is it the left hand? Is it the right hand? What was the reason for imaging? Well, this is a follow-up picture for a previously diagnosed, you know, precancerous mole or something. And one of the things we've done is to continue to, even though there's no order, to continue to generate an accession number for these, because for a lot of the imaging management parts of the EMR, the accession number is how they index these and how they then call up viewers within the EMR based around that. And then finally, the pixel metadata. And the pixel metadata is the part that, you know, even regular digital cameras typically do a good job of. You'll know the rows, the columns, the pixel size. If you want real-world spacing, then you get into putting calibration objects in the field of view and the like. So there'll be some procedural things for some of your imaging you'll want to get into. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is turn a JPEG into a medical document. Let's make this a real part of the medical record. In terms of motivation, well, okay, yeah, that sounds nice. What's the harm? Well, you know, if you haven't integrated the acquisition in a complete and consistent way, you're going to be damaging both quality and efficiency. The images get buried off in the medical record, they get scanned in, and without proper metadata, you're not going to be able to navigate them, you're not going to be able to filter them. You know, it's like trolling through your iPhone. I think I took a picture of this, like, you know, 2 months ago. If you want to be able to pull things up in a patient encounter, you don't have 10 minutes to go wandering through these folders and folders of files. Oh, that looks like skin. Nope, that's not the right one. And then you also end up with cases where they're stored locally. So each of the departments has their own little pot of images. Nobody else gets easy access to it, let alone trying to share those between institutions. You know, you scan down the list, image, image, image. Ooh, this one's a color image. Let's have a look at that and see what's in there. So because of all of that, the images are not readily available to the care team, in which case, what was the point of taking them in the first place? You lose time due to awkward workflow and data capture. All of this should really be automated. It's what we did in radiology and cardiology. It's not really the fault of the people or even the EMR involved. It's that the capture process needs to be more integrated and more automated so that all this stuff is happening pretty much in the background. So the goal of the profile, we want to facilitate clinical use of the images, and we also want to facilitate billing and analytics as well as secondary uses of that metadata. So you need the good, consistent metadata. These are the tags that are going to drive easy retrieval, being able to find the images. They should be able to help with decision support, with hanging protocols. All of these depend on having consistent series names, consistent procedure codes. And the goal is also efficient workflow. We want to minimize the amount of data entry because as soon as people have to do it manually, it's both slower and more error prone. This should all be happening automated. It should all be electronic transfers. Now, there are a huge number of use cases. This was all the et ceteras in that list. Because it was a pretty big chunk to bite off in one bite, we decided to take it step by step. And so this first profile is focused on point-of-care ultrasound. There are absolutely a ton of uses in other areas. And our intention in this coming year is to submit a proposal to do the second half of the profile, if you will, or the second flavor of the profile, which is to address digital photography and the use of smartphones and tablets. But to get our feet wet, the first profile is on point-of-care ultrasound. And so you can imagine being in an ER, for example, and the physician has a patient there, and he thinks, I'd like to take a look at this, and he grabs the ER ultrasound cart and rolls that over. You know, starts off, for example, scanning the wristband, which is typically going to contain either a patient ID or an admission ID. And similar to the way that the ultrasound cart would then go get a work list, if this were a scheduled procedure, it's going to send that key, the admission ID or the patient ID, up to what we're calling an encounter manager, which provides back all of the details that are known about the patient so far. They've been admitted, you know, or they've been initially had their data put into the EMR. We know their birth date. We know that it's an ER encounter, et cetera. So whatever information it can provide back is now available for the ultrasound system, so that when you proceed, and how the encounter manager gets that, we decided not to nail that down in the profile. We could imagine the encounter manager might be a component of the EMR. It might use, you know, MPI or IHE patient account management profiles or patient demographics queries. So there are a variety of ways the encounter manager could be integrated into the metadata, you know, environment to be able to have that ready to send down to modalities. We decided not to nail that down. We simply gave a list of 4 or 5 reasonable ways. You're required to have done one of them, and we'll see how that works out. So once the patient is scanned, again, automatically the metadata gets put on top of the images. Those get stored off to the image manager. But there's one additional step that's needed here. Because there was no order, the EMR is not going to be aware of the images unless somebody tells it. And so we initially called this actor the EMR. It was pointed out this could be a front end on the EMR. It could be a variety of result aggregators. So we changed the name, but we expect this would be a typical function to build into an EMR to receive these kind of messages. And so the notification contains, you know, the patient ID, the visit ID, all of the basic details to put an entry into the medical record that there are a set of images, and here are the details about those images. The profile does not require the EMR to create an order in the background, but we recognize that a lot of EMRs prefer to backfill an order even for non-ordered imaging, because that relates to how they do their image management and their billing. And so all of the information is there. If they want to backfill it, they can. The profile doesn't require them to. So the actor transaction diagram form of what we just looked at is this. It's a relatively straightforward profile. There's only 3 transactions, and most actors only have to deal with 2 of them. And so, we're looking forward to the first set of Connectathon testing. At the beginning, we were kind of poking around at the use case to find out how prevalent is point-of-care ultrasound, and it really turns out that it's used in a lot of different places in the hospital, and it's seeing a bit of an expansion. I've seen a number of training courses on how to do a better job of it, how to use ultrasound more widely. And it's things like doing inpatient status checks, checking on the state of the bladder or the placement of a needle. We talked in the previous slide about ER evaluations for an enormous variety of things, internal bleeding, infections, edemas. There's a lot of things that ultrasound can be used for in the ER. procedure guidance that if you're doing a biopsy or other kinds of interventions, more and more frequently they're guiding those with ultrasound. And then there may be supplemental acquisitions. You may have been sent off to a specialist to a breast surgeon, for example, and they may do some initial imaging just as part of their normal workup. So just to give you some points of reference then, the radiology technical frameworks can be found at this URL. You can jot this down, and or the slides will be available afterward, I'm sure. Within that section, you scroll down to our supplements for trial implementation, and you can see that we now have an entry there for the encounter-based imaging workflow. So with apologies to Game of Thrones, if you're a vendor, Connectathon is coming. We have one of them appropriately in winter in January coming up in Cleveland, and there'll be another coming up in France in April for European-based vendors. And then on the user side, we encourage you to grab a copy of the profile, take a look at some of the Volume 1 material, the concept section, just to describe how this would fit into your organization, and start considering to put this into your RFP requirements.